I was reading about this experiment, and it wasn't in a lab. It was in a private clinic.
Right.
You had a 17-year-old boy, his 40-something-year-old father, and his 70-year-old grandfather. All three of them hooked up for a 3-generation blood swap.
It sounds like something out of science fiction.
It really does. The father, a tech mogul who'd already made nearly $1 billion, was having his son's plasma pumped into his own body.
Okay.
And in exchange, he was giving his own plasma to his father. It was a strange, closed loop of familial blood, all in pursuit of one goal: to not get old.
To just stop aging.
Exactly. But then the really interesting part, he just stopped. He announced the data wasn't compelling, his biomarkers hadn't moved, the experiment was over.
Just like that.
Just like that. Great. There was no discussion of how bizarre it all was, no emotion, just a cold reading of the spreadsheet. That single moment, that willingness to turn your family into a live data point and then abandon it just as clinically, that tells you everything. It's the story of a man who has decided his own body, his self, is a problem to be solved, an algorithm to be optimized, and he's willing to spend $2 million a year to prove it.
That anecdote, really right at the very beginning of Project Blueprint, encapsulates the entire discussion we need to have.
It does.
It just strips away all the headlines and presents us with the fundamental premise that the human body is ultimately an engineering problem.
Right.
One that can be measured, quantified, and ultimately solved, given enough resources and enough data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is the mission of this deep dive. We are going far beyond the quirky headlines and the viral videos to unpack the hard science, the unique philosophy, and the profound ethical implications of this whole pursuit.
Right, the methodological problems too.
Yes. We want you to walk away not just knowing what Brian Johnson is doing, but why it matters for the future of health, wealth, and, human identity itself.
And we're looking at this through 3 central conflicts that Project Blueprint immediately forces you to confront. First, we'll analyze the philosophical battle between what he calls the autonomous self, the algorithmic, optimized self, versus, traditional human autonomy and free will.
And second, we have to address the crucial tension between real scientific rigor. The painstaking work of large-scale clinical trials designed for public benefit and the inherent limitations of what he's doing.
Which is strictly N1 self-experimentation.
Exactly. No matter how detailed the measurements are, it's still just one person.
And finally, we have to dive into the massive bioethical dilemma, the one posed by these ultra-expensive longevity technologies, a $2 million annual protocol, in a world where, frankly, profound health inequality is already a crisis.
It raises the question, who gets to live forever, and what's the social cost of that pursuit for everyone else?
Yeah.
So let's start with the architect of the system, Brian Johnson. We mentioned he's a tech entrepreneur, but his financial success is what gives him this unique platform.
Right. He found a Braintree.
He did. A mobile and web payment system that, crucially, acquired Venmo before the whole operation was sold to PayPal for a colossal $800 million back in 2013.
So he's not just rich. He has the mind and the resources of a systems architect.
And that background is absolutely central, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because he treats his health with the same mentality he used to scale Braintree.
He does. He explicitly shifted his focus entirely, moving from engineering complex software systems to engineering his own biological system. His ultimate stated objective is not just to live longer, but to maximally slow the speed of biological aging.
The rallying cry he settled on is simple, almost confronting: don't die.
It's more than a slogan, though. It reflects a complete cognitive reframing of the problem.
How so?
Well, aging and death are removed from the category of, natural inevitability.
And they're reclassified.
They're reclassified as an engineering problem. And for an engineer, every problem has to have a solution.
So he sees aging as a system failure. His body is just a set of algorithms that are running inefficiently or with, obsolete code.
That's the perfect analogy. And this systematic reframing leads us into the philosophical scaffolding he built, starting with something he calls Zeroism.
Zeroism? Yeah. It isn't just a quirky name. It seems to be his entire operating philosophy for navigating the world.
It is. Zeroism, as he frames it, is a belief system centered on navigating the unknown and seeking transformative elements through exploration, rather than, say, deducing the future from existing principles.
So it's about acknowledging that the way we are now, our current human condition, including aging, it's suboptimal.
Deeply suboptimal, and that the only way to transform that condition is through ruthless experimentation and data collection, often entering territory where there are few measurable results. It's the mindset of a startup founder, really.
But this exploration is geared toward a very practical objective, which he calls alignment.
Yes. The core problem for him is a lack of internal alignment. His stated goal is, and I'm quoting here, goal aligning the 35 plus trillion cells that make me who I am.
35 trillion cells.
He sees the human body as this complex network of components, those cells that are currently working against each other because of bad inputs and bad managerial decisions.
And by managerial decisions, he means his own conscious mind.
Precisely. If every cell is performing optimally, the entire organism should, in theory, slow its decay.
This is where we hit the most radical philosophical departure. The demotion of the mind. He uses his, superior human intelligence to design a system that consciously revokes the authority of that very same intelligence over his physical inputs.
That's it, exactly. He explicitly declares his mind, which he views as a storytelling creature that just generates unreliable narratives, rationalizations, and ideology. He declares it unauthorized to make basic life decisions.
Especially about food and health.
Especially about food and health. The data, the algorithm, the system, they are elevated to the position of supreme non-negotiable authority. He has essentially automated his own health governance.
And the person he is firing from that job is the rascal. Yeah. I think this is a beautifully personified description of self-sabotage. Tell us more about who this rascal is.
The rascal is the internal mechanism of self-destructive behavior. Johnson describes him as 7 p.m. Brian, the sweet talker and expert rationalizer who would overeat, seek instant gratification, or soothe the stresses of the day with poor choices.
So the version of yourself at the end of a long day that just wants to order a pizza.
Exactly that. This late-day version of himself, driven by emotional impulses and comfort-seeking, was seen as a monster, overpowering and indifferent to the blueprint goal. The rascal in his framework is the prime obstacle to alignment.
So the solution wasn't therapy or developing greater willpower?
No. It was a clinical, irrevocable firing. He decided to perpetually revoke the rascal's authority over all health decisions.
And the language he uses is severe. Self-destructive acts are reframed as violence against the self.
That's a key point. By framing the impulse for a late-night snack or a day off the routine as an act of violence, he creates this immediate, severe moral boundary. This isn't about feeling guilty. It's about adhering to the law of the system he engineered.
And the perceived benefit is profound, at least according to him. He claims this radical restriction provides, and this is another quote, orders of magnitude more exquisite joy, clarity of thought, and emotional stability than he ever had with unfettered choice.
He grounds this claim in the historical idea that civilization advances by automating operations, like manufacturing or computation, so the human mind can focus on higher-level problems.
Right.
In his view, the most crucial operation, existence itself, which he calls level 0, is currently handled inefficiently by emotional impulse.
So by automating health management.
He believes his cognitive energy is freed up entirely for philosophy, innovation, and deeper contemplation. It's the ultimate attempt to scale the mind by optimizing the machine it runs on.
Okay, so this systemic approach, it requires enormous resources. Let's look at the sheer scale of the Blueprint protocol. It costs a staggering $2 million per year.
Managed by a dedicated team of over 30 medical professionals, doctors, imaging specialists, dietitians, researchers, all focused on generating and reacting to data.
And the daily routine is it's precisely engineered. A rigid intake of exactly 2,250 calories.
Consumed within a structured eating window, which typically results in a 16 to 18-hour daily fast.
And the volume of food is immense, but it's all nutrient-dense. He consumes over 70 pounds of vegetables, berries, and nuts every month.
It's an incredible amount.
The food items themselves have become almost famous in these biohacking circles. The super veggie and the nutty pudding. What exactly goes into these, and how are they informed by gold standard scientific evidence? Because that phrase can mean almost anything.
That's a critical question. When he says gold standard evidence, he's usually referring to data that supports maximal nutrient density, low inflammatory profiles, and low glycemic index.
Okay, so break down the super veggie for us.
The super veggie is a blend built around lentils, broccoli, cauliflower, mushrooms, and spices. It's emphasizing cruciferous vegetables known for their anti-cancer properties and high fiber. The lentils provide slow-release carbs and plant protein.
And the spices.
Spices like turmeric and ginger are chosen specifically for their effect on anti-inflammatory biomarkers in the blood. And the preparation is key. Everything is precisely portioned and prepared to maximize bioavailability.
And the nutty pudding, what is that?
That serves as his dessert substitute and his antioxidant powerhouse. It has cocoa powder for flavonoids, macadamia nuts for healthy fats, and large quantities of berries, which are high in antioxidants and polyphenols.
So again, the goal isn't flavor or satisfaction in the traditional sense.
No, not at all. It's about maximal nutritional impact derived from large-scale studies on longevity diets.
And then we get to the supplements. This is where the technical complexity just spikes. The protocol calls for over 100 pills daily.
100 pills, yeah, including vitamins, compounds, and prescription drugs.
Can we break down some of the most prominent ones and what they're supposed to do?
Absolutely. We see a strong emphasis on compounds associated with cellular energy and metabolism. Two highly discussed ones are nicotinamide riboside, or NR, and nicotinamide mononucleotide, NMN.
And what do those do?
They are precursors to NAD plus NAD, which is a coenzyme crucial for cellular repair and energy production that, declines with age. The theory is that supplementing these compounds boosts NAD plus levels, improving mitochondrial function and cellular resilience.
But these compounds, they aren't universally accepted treatments, are they?
Not at all. They're very popular in longevity circles based on robust mouse and cellular studies, but human data, especially long-term double-blind clinical outcomes, is still accumulating.
Right.
And it's often debated regarding optimal dosage and efficacy in people who are already healthy.
And he uses prescription drugs too, even though he's ostensibly healthy. I see metformin and acarbose are listed.
Yes. Metformin is primarily an inexpensive drug for type 2 diabetes, but it has gained significant traction as a potential longevity agent because it improves insulin sensitivity and appears to mimic some effects of caloric restriction.
And acarbose?
That's another anti-diabetic medication. It works by slowing the digestion of complex carbohydrates, which results in a gentler, lower rise in blood sugar after a meal.
So even with his incredibly strict diet, he's adding drugs designed to manage blood sugar spikes. He's basically engineering perfect glucose control.
He is.
But the concern there has to be giving high-powered drugs designed for sick people to a healthy person who already practices extreme dietary control.
Precisely. While the science supports the potential anti-aging pathways, the long-term effects of taking these drugs when you already have pristine health metrics are completely unknown. And that's a source of great debate among endocrinologists and anti-aging experts. It really embodies the high-risk, high-reward nature of his Zeroism philosophy.
So what does this $2 million system achieve, according to his own data? What are the claimed metrics that justify this monumental effort?
Well, the headline claim is based on his pace of aging, which is measured by the clinically validated Dundon pace clock. He claims his overall pace is 0.53.
Wait, so what does that actually mean, 0.53?
It's highly significant. It means for every one chronological year that passes, his body ages just over half a year biologically. He cites this data point as ranking him #1 in the Rejuvenation Olympics.
But let's pause on the Dindon pace clock. I mean, how is this clock validated, and why should we view his ranking with a measure of scientific skepticism, even if the clock itself is valid?
That's a great question. The Dindon pace clock is a sophisticated epigenetic clock developed at the University of Otago in New Zealand. It measures changes in DNA methylation patterns. These are chemical tags on DNA that switch genes on or off.
Okay.
And unlike earlier clocks that just estimate biological age, Dindon pace tries to measure the rate of aging over time. It's highly validated and seen as a significant advance because it correlates strongly with physical and cognitive decline.
So the mechanism is sound, but the application here,
Yeah.
that's where the questions come in.
Exactly. The skepticism arises because, while the clock is valid for large population studies, its predictive power on a single, highly optimized individual operating so far outside the norm is less clear.
And the #1 ranking.
Well, that's essentially a self-reported leaderboard based on his published data against other publicly available results. It's great marketing, but it lacks the rigorous, independent verification you'd see if the data were presented in a blinded clinical trial setting.
Right. And beyond the pace of aging, he reports specific organ age equivalents based on hundreds of measurements from advanced diagnostics like whole-body MRIs and detailed blood panels. Give us some examples of these pretty impressive claims.
He claims organ metrics equivalent to a much younger man. A 37-year-old heart, 28-year-old skin, and critically, an 18-year-old VO2 max.
And VO2 max, just to remind everyone, is the gold standard for aerobic fitness.
It is. It's the maximum rate of oxygen consumption measured during incremental exercise. An 18-year-old equivalent at his age is genuinely remarkable.
And he also uses highly specific, less commonly discussed biomarkers. For example, he mentions his gingival index and his MIPME measurements. What are these and why does he track them?
He tracks them because true optimization requires looking at every single system, even the ones that seem minor. The gingival index measures the health and inflammation of the gum.
Health.
Yeah, it's a measure of periodontal health. It sounds minor, but gum health is increasingly linked to systemic inflammation and cardiovascular risk. By claiming the index of a healthy teenager, he's showing control over a key inflammatory gateway.
And MIPME?
Those stand for maximum inspiratory pressure and maximum expiratory pressure. They measure the strength of your respiratory muscles, primarily the diaphragm and intercostals. In aging, lung and diaphragm strength naturally declines, which impacts overall fitness and longevity.
So he's quantifying his breathing strength.
He's quantifying everything. It is truly a complete transformation of the self into measurable data.
Okay, so moving from the astounding metrics and the sheer complexity of the system, we have to look at this through the lens of traditional scientific methodology.
Yes.
Because when you talk to clinical scientists, Project Blueprint shifts quickly from being a personal marvel to a methodological paradox.
This is the critical methodological critique. Project Blueprint, despite its high cost and high-tech diagnostics, is viewed by many established clinical scientists as a fascinating high-budget personal blog or simply an anecdote.
Not generalizable science.
Not generalizable science. The fundamental issue is the N1 limitation, a sample size of 1.
That puts him directly at odds with the entire world of public health research. I remember the analogy you mentioned before, contrasting Johnson's project with the labor of a clinical researcher. Could you bring that back for us?
Yeah, sure. So imagine a researcher we'll call Dr. Imani. She has spent the last decade of her life coordinating a phase 3 double-blind placebo-controlled trial for a new compound aimed at halting sarcopenia or age-related muscle loss.
Okay.
Her work is agonizingly slow. It involves thousands of diverse patients across multiple continents, and every single step from recruitment to data analysis must be meticulously rigorous to eliminate systematic bias.
Because if she gets it wrong.
If she gets it wrong, the drug might be approved and harm millions, or a genuine lifesaver might just be shelved.
Meanwhile, Johnson is tracking himself with superior diagnostics, moving fast, adjusting hundreds of variables based on what he sees in his own data.
Exactly. Dr. Imani's goal is to find a solution that could help millions of grandmothers in Mumbai, mechanics in Brazil, teachers in Ohio. Johnson's project, as meticulous as it is scientifically validated only for Brian Johnson.
So it's a personal success map, not a universal public health map.
That's the perfect way to put it. It hammers home that methodological limitation.
And to understand why this distinction is so vital, we need to understand the hierarchy of evidence used in medicine. Where does Johnson's approach actually land on that hierarchy?
Well, medical research is ranked by the relative strength of results, and critically, the study designs freedom from systematic bias. At the pinnacle, the absolute gold standard, we have meta-analyses and systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials, or RCTs.
And RCTs are the benchmark because they use large populations, randomization, and a placebo group.
Exactly. To ensure the effect is due to the intervention itself, not the patient's expectation, the placebo effect.
So where does Johnson's N1 approach fall?
It lands on the lowest tiers, right alongside case reports and expert opinion without explicit critical appraisal.
So even with all the fancy tech?
Even with state-of-the-art diagnostics, MRIs, ultrasounds, detailed epigenetic sequencing, the lack of a control group for the intervention itself prevents him from proving that any perceived success is due to the protocol. It could just be a massive, consistent change in lifestyle or even natural statistical variance in his biomarkers.
I want to play devil's advocate here, though. Johnson is open sourcing all this data, and the diagnostics are arguably superior to what many phase 3 trials can even afford. Is the N1 criticism entirely fair if he's generating this massive longitudinal data set of himself that is transparently available?
That's a fair counterpoint, and it does highlight the novelty of the project. He is contributing valuable information about the feasibility and limits of personalized optimization. Yeah. But the criticism remains. A large amount of detailed data on one person is still data on one person. Even if the data shows his arterial elasticity improved, we cannot ethically or scientifically prescribe his 100-pill stack to another person without an RCT showing safety and efficacy across a diverse population.
So his data can generate hypotheses for clinical trials.
But it cannot replace them.
And the limitations of this highly individualized algorithm are clearest when we look at the highly public failures. Let's start with the rapamycin regret.
This was a massive 5-year commitment. Rapamycin, an immunosuppressant, gained a lot of popularity in anti-ageist circles because mouse longevity studies showed it could extend lifespan significantly.
And he was tracking his dosage meticulously.
He was. But the reality, once again, proved that biology is much messier than an algorithm. He began experiencing these troubling, highly personal side effects. Persistent mouth ulcers, slow-healing wounds, cholesterol imbalances, blood sugar spikes.
And an uptick in his resting heart rate.
Right, which he sees as a very negative indicator for recovery.
And the turning point was a study from Yale.
Yes. A Yale University study specifically used epigenetic clocks to analyze the effect of rapamycin on his biology. And they found that despite the longevity theory, the drug actually accelerated biological aging across 16 epigenetic markers for him.
Accelerated it. How does a drug meant to potentially extend life suddenly accelerate aging via epigenetic markers?
Well, the epigenetic clocks track DNA methylation, which is the body's method of regulating gene expression. Certain patterns correlate with chronological age and poor health outcomes.
Okay.
And while rapamycin works by inhibiting mTOR, a cellular pathway linked to growth and aging in Johnson's specific biological context, the drug appears to have triggered a cascade of adverse methylation patterns.
Suggesting his body was under stress.
High stress or even accelerated decay, possibly due to the immunosuppressive nature of the drug overwhelming the benefits of mTOR inhibition. 5 years of effort, millions spent, and the data showed the precise opposite of the intended effect.
That's a powerful validation of the data-driven approach, in a way. The system caught an error that his conscious mind couldn't detect.
It does, but it also demonstrates the sheer biological complexity that renders these universal assumptions so dangerous. What works for a mouse or even another human might be biologically detrimental to Johnson.
It just reinforces the N1 problem.
Completely. His protocol is a customized solution that is constantly failing and being debugged in real time.
And the second failure is the most famous one, the blood swap. The very anecdote we opened with.
The high-profile 3-generation plasma exchange, using his son's young plasma and giving his own to his father. It was based on these old studies in mice called parabiosis.
Where they join the circulatory systems of young and old mice.
Right, and they see rejuvenation effects in the older animal.
Yeah.
The theory was that young plasma carries rejuvenating factors.
Yet the clinical admission was utterly cold. The intervention was discontinued because the data was non-compelling.
The data just didn't produce the measurable biomarker improvements he was chasing. They measured dozens of potential plasma-borne factors, looking for movement in his inflammation levels, cellular senescence markers, epigenetic age, and nothing.
So when the expensive, high-profile intervention failed to move the spreadsheet,
it was immediately clinically terminated. No emotional investment, just a cold recognition that the high-stakes experiment didn't pay off.
This brings us to the biggest scientific headache facing any N1 experiment, the difficulty of causality.
It's an insurmountable barrier in this context. I mean, Johnson's protocol is this radical multi-component intervention: caloric restriction, specific eating windows, intense exercise, sleep optimization, over 100 supplements, prescription drugs.
All at once.
All at once. So even if his VO2 max improves, determining which of these hundreds of variables or the synergistic effect of a few of them is responsible it's impossible.
A true clinical scientist wants to test one thing against a control group to isolate its effect. Johnson is testing everything, all at once, on one person. It's a brilliant black box, but it generates more hypotheses than publishable, generalizable results.
That's the bottom line.
So this relentless pursuit of quantifiable youth, requiring $2 million a year, inevitably brings us to the profound ethical questions it raises, especially when you contrast it with the basic health struggles of the majority of the population.
The $2 million annual cost is the central point of the social critique. It immediately ensures that this is a rich person's game, suggesting that if radical life extension technology emerges from this path, it will fundamentally and severely exacerbate global social division.
It turns health inequality into existential inequality.
That's a very good way to put it.
And the dissonance created by this disparity is just immense. We shared the anecdote about the ER nurse in a rural clinic. It's worth sitting with the weight of that experience for a moment.
It really is. The nurse spent her shift caring for a diabetic patient who was rationing insulin to make his vial last until his next paycheck. Insulin, a basic century-old medicine, was a luxury this patient couldn't reliably afford.
And then, on her break.
Then, scrolling through her phone later that day, she saw the articles detailing Johnson's multi-million-dollar budget to optimize every single one of his organs, and her reaction was crucial. A feeling of profound dissonance. She felt they were living not just in different countries, but in different centuries of healthcare access.
Wow, that's a powerful image. It just cuts through the abstract bioethical debates and shows the human reality.
It does.
While one person is pursuing biological immortality, others are struggling to survive the week because they can't afford basic 20th century medication. The question is forced upon us. What is the utility of this innovation if the price of entry ensures only the hyper-rich benefit?
And this ethical gap has profound policy implications. If Blueprint leads to genuine breakthroughs, governments worldwide have to address how they'll mandate access. Whether it's through subsidized scaling, global health tariffs on these technologies, or intellectual property regulations that prioritize public benefit over private profit, the current system ensures exclusion.
And moving beyond the cost, there's the existential trade-off. What is the value of an extended life that is devoid of traditional, non-optimized spontaneity? Johnson claims exquisite joy, but many observers see only rigidity and profound sacrifice.
And this is the fundamental philosophical conflict between duration versus depth. Longevity science aims for maximal duration, adding years. But the price of that optimization often involves sacrificing moments of messy, spontaneous, profound human depth.
The story of the 88-year-old grandfather who was a retired stonemason, it just perfectly illustrates this trade-off.
It does.
He lived a life of physical labor, his body bearing the scars of his work. His diet was certainly not Blueprint approved. But when asked what he wanted for his birthday, he didn't ask for a new fitness tracker.
No.
He wanted a specific plate of tagliatelle al ragu, a simple, carb-heavy pasta dish, and a small glass of cheap red wine.
And that moment of pure, unoptimized pleasure where he closed his eyes and was completely lost in the taste and the memory, it stands in direct contrast to the Blueprint life.
Completely. Johnson's existence is a rigid pursuit of duration. Highly optimized, highly regimented, where pleasure is a byproduct of data adherence, not spontaneity.
The grandfather's life, despite its physical costs, centered on depth. It forces us to ask, is the optimized life truly losing its meaning by engineering out the very human struggle and spontaneity that gives those moments of pleasure their value?
And this brings us back to the paradox of autonomy. Johnson argues that his regimented life is actually a source of freedom, a superior method for achieving human well-being.
His argument is that his past self, the rascal, was not truly free. He was a slave to impulse, which led him to depression and self-sabotage.
So by sacrificing the micro-choices like choosing a meal or a dessert,
he believes he gains cognitive freedom to focus on higher-level problems, free from the constant mental drain of self-regulation and guilt. He actually says his best self ever has come from the demotion of my mind and the elevation of systems in its place.
So he's essentially saying the human technologies of willpower and intuition are obsolete and faulty for maintaining existence. The algorithm is just better.
It's like a child in a structured, safe environment. They have less choice, but maybe less anxiety about the infinite possibilities of failure.
But to most people, that sounds like the opposite of freedom.
Well, critics view this regimentation as the loss of authentic human autonomy. They argue that well-being isn't just a physical metric. It includes the ability to choose, to fail, and to find meaning in the struggle against impulse. The rascal, for all his faults, represents the spontaneous, emotional core of humanity.
So living purely to specification, driven by the ruthless pursuit of a metric.
They argue it strips life of its messy, unpredictable, and often profound essence.
And it's interesting to circle back to the blood swap here. When he terminated that experiment with his son and father, there was no emotional justification, only the cold fact that the data wasn't compelling.
Right.
That coldness, the clinical prioritization of the spreadsheet over familial bonds, is exactly what critics fear. That optimization requires the sacrifice of traditional human sentimentality for the sake of the metric.
Absolutely.
Project Blueprint, for all its eccentricity, isn't an isolated experiment. It's a highly visible, high-resource case study sitting squarely at the cutting edge of a massive technological shift, a shift researchers are calling biodigital convergence.
And that is the perfect frame for it. This convergence is fundamentally changing how we define ourselves, shifting the perception of the human body from a mysterious organism governed by vital forces to a complex system governed by predictable, digitally manageable characteristics.
Johnson's view of his body as an algorithm to be optimized is the ultimate expression of this trend.
It is, and this shift is manifesting in three distinct forms of convergence, according to analysis of global technology trends.
What's the first one?
The first is full physical integration. This is the literal meshing of the biological and the digital. Think of digital technology embedded within organisms like highly advanced human-computer interfaces, specialized medical devices working inside the body.
Or even those surveillance locusts with embedded guidance systems.
Exactly. The physical boundary between self and technology just dissolves.
And the second form is the coevolution of technologies, which is maybe the most relevant to longevity science.
I would agree. Digital tools like AI and machine learning are now just inextricably linked to biological research. AI helps scientists analyze vast data sets of genomes and proteins to predict genetic expression or identify targets for therapies.
And the reverse is true too, right? Biological understanding, like neural nets, shapes digital systems.
Correct. The rapid breakthroughs in gene editing techniques like CRISPR-Cas9, for instance, would have been impossible without the massive analytical power of modern bioinformatics and digital processing.
And the third form of convergence is the one we spent the most time on, conceptual convergence.
This is the philosophical shift away from vitalism, the old idea that life possesses some non-physical element or spark to viewing biology as having purely predictable, digitally manageable characteristics.
Now, when Johnson measures his pace of aging at 0.53 using an epigenetic clock,
he is affirming that life, down to the molecular level, is quantifiable and thus controllable through digital inputs and calculated interventions.
So if this is the new system, what are its inherent characteristics that allow for biohacking on the scale of Project Blueprint?
Well, the first defining characteristic is the intense reliance on data. This new biodigital ecosystem just cannot operate without vast, high-quality data sets of genomes, phenotypes, lifestyle inputs, environmental contexts, all of it.
So the growth in the bioinformatics market is all about feeding that need for data.
Completely. It's driven by the need for this data to fuel the AI and machine learning models necessary for breakthroughs. And Johnson is contributing one of the most detailed N1 datasets ever compiled.
We also see customization. The complexity of biological systems, like the human microbiome, which is unique to every single individual, means that personalized therapies are increasingly necessary.
This complexity allows for high degrees of customized therapies and production. Johnson's entire protocol is a highly custom-designed, dynamically updating system of inputs and outputs, fine-tuned specifically to his unique genetic and epigenetic makeup. Standard, one-size-fits-all medical advice just won't work for this level of optimization.
And finally, we see the paradox of decentralization and democratization clashing with reality. Theoretically, the tools are cheaper and more accessible than ever.
Yeah, the cost of full genome sequencing has plummeted from $3 billion to under $600 today, making personalized genetic data widely accessible. Basic biohacking kits are available for under $200.
So that suggests a democratization of tools and information.
It does.
But that starkly contrasts with Johnson's ultra-exclusive, multi-million-dollar execution. He may be open sourcing his data, but the resources required to execute Blueprint at that level with 30 specialists and advanced imaging are the exact opposite of democratization.
It creates a significant policy challenge. If radical life extension emerges only through complex, high-cost protocols like Blueprint, the system reinforces economic exclusion. The tools might be cheap, but the know-how, the monitoring, the corrective resources, they remain prohibitively expensive.
And this convergence and the resulting inequality are already forcing serious policy questions onto governments worldwide. What are the major policy challenges that projects like Blueprint immediately highlight for regulators?
The most immediate social question is how to manage escalating health inequality. If life-extending technologies cost $2 million annually, governments have to determine how to handle that massive social division.
If only the hyper-rich can afford to add decades of healthy life, we face an unprecedented fracturing of the human experience.
We do. And policy debates are already happening on potential solutions, like implementing global health tariffs on these high-cost technologies to fund research for public access or mandatory pricing tiers.
And the issue of collective privacy is deeply complex when you're dealing with biological data. It's not just about one person's information anymore.
Exactly. Your genetic sequence provides information not just about you, but about your biological relatives and your entire community. If that data is collected and centralized, it becomes a powerful predictive tool.
So we need policies that think beyond individual privacy.
Urgently. Policies that consider the rights of the collective, particularly concerning potential discrimination by insurers or employers against entire genetic pools.
Furthermore, there's the challenge of regulating intellectual property. As biological data becomes the new raw material, who owns the rights to a specific genome sequence or targeted microbiome solution?
This process is often called bioprospecting. If a corporation analyzes vast pools of genetic data to find a longevity solution, who owns that resulting IP? Policy has to balance the need to incentivize research with the ethical controversy that arises when the raw material is human biology itself.
It's a huge challenge.
It is. We are seeing proposals for new IP regimes, maybe modeled after open source software, to ensure genomic data and basic biological insights remain accessible for public health benefit, rather than being locked away solely for profit.
This deep dive has shown us that Project Blueprint is so much more than a wealthy man's eccentric hobby. It's a front-row seat to the collision of science, wealth, and philosophy at the dawn of the biodigital age.
It really is.
We have moved from the intensely personal anecdote of the failed three-generation blood swap to the systemic concerns about who controls the future of life extension and what it costs, not just in dollars, but in the sacrifice of the messy, unpredictable essence of being human.
We've seen the relentless pursuit of the metric, the demotion of the mind in favor of the algorithm, and the difficult reality that even the most well-funded superior engoyim experiments run into the hard limits of causality and generalizability when you contrast them with the rigor required for public health solutions. The data is incredible, but the application is inherently narrow.
We started with a man who classified his body as an engineering problem to be solved. As technology allows us to automate our biological existence, transforming the self into an algorithm, the real challenge may not be whether we can extend our lives, but whether we are willing to accept a future where human struggle and spontaneity, the very things that drive the rascal, the messy choices, the spur-of-the-moment carb-heavy dinner, are defined as obsolete design flaws that must be ruthlessly engineered out of the species.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the algorithmic pursuit of immortality.